The temperature was 20 degrees and the freezing homeowner stood in a thin cardigan, watching her mother-in-law smile through the front door glass. The locks were changed. "Family only tonight," the older woman mouthed before drawing the blinds. 7 days later, that same mother-in-law would be entirely homeless. Listen closely. To understand how I ended up freezing on my own front porch on the night before Christmas, you have to understand the dynamic of my marriage to Liam Mitchell. When I met Liam, I was 28, working grueling 60-hour weeks as a pediatric trauma nurse in Chicago, and fiercely independent. I had inherited a modest sum from my late grandfather, which I aggressively invested. By the time Liam and I got serious, I had just closed on my dream home, a gorgeous 5-bedroom colonial in Oak Brook, completely surrounded by mature oak trees. The deed, the mortgage, the insurance, everything was entirely in my name. Liam was a freelance graphic designer. He was charming, funny, and deeply insecure about the fact that his girlfriend made 3 times his salary and owned a massive house. When we got engaged, he made a strange request. He asked if we could tell his parents, Richard and Brenda Mitchell, that we bought the house together, or better yet, that he had been the primary buyer. "My dad is incredibly old school," Liam had pleaded, looking down at his shoes. "If he knows I moved into my wife's house, he'll never let me hear the end of it. He'll think I'm less of a man." Against my better judgment, I agreed. I loved him and I didn't care about the optics. It was a white lie to protect his ego. I didn't realize that this single lie would become the weapon his family would try to use to destroy me. For the first 2 years of our marriage, Richard and Brenda were tolerable because they lived in Florida. But then the financial dominoes fell. Richard, the man whose arrogance was only matched by his financial incompetence, lost their entire retirement savings in a series of disastrous day trading schemes. They were evicted from their condo. Liam was beside himself. He begged me to let them move into the first-floor guest suite of our house just for a few months while they got back on their feet. I hesitated. Brenda had always been sharply passive-aggressive toward me, dropping little hints that I worked too much and wasn't a traditional wife to her precious son. But it was family, and I had the space. I said yes. Within a week of moving in, the guest suite wasn't enough. Brenda began slowly annexing my home. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets because my organization didn't make sense. She took down my artwork in the living room and replaced it with cheap, generic floral prints she found at a thrift store. Whenever I confronted her, she would bat her eyelashes and say, "Oh, Chloe, I'm just trying to make Liam's house feel more like a home. You're always at the hospital. You never have time to nest." Liam's house. She said it constantly. Every time she said it, I looked at Liam, waiting for him to correct her. He never did. He would just stare at his phone, pretending not to hear. By December, the tension in the house was suffocating. Liam's sister, Jessica, had flown in from Denver with her 3 chaotic children for the holidays. Naturally, Brenda invited them to stay at the house without asking me. My quiet sanctuary had turned into a loud, messy, hostile frat house where I was treated like the unpaid maid. Then came Christmas Eve. I had just pulled a brutal 12-hour shift at the hospital. We had dealt with a multi-car pileup, and I was physically and emotionally drained. My scrubs smelled like iodine and bleach. All I wanted was a hot shower, a glass of wine, and to sit by the fireplace in the home I worked so hard to pay for. I pulled into the driveway at 8:30 p.m. The house was brightly lit. I could see the silhouette of the Christmas tree in the front window, and through the glass I saw Brenda, Richard, Jessica, and Liam laughing, passing around mugs of what looked like hot cider. I trudged up the front steps, the freezing Illinois wind biting through my wool cardigan. I fumbled in my purse for my keys with numb fingers, found the brass key to the front door, and slid it into the lock. It didn't turn. I frowned. pulling it out and trying again. It stuck halfway. I tried jiggling it. Nothing. The lock mechanism was entirely different. It was shiny and new. Confused, I knocked on the heavy wooden door. A moment later, the porch light flicked on. Brenda appeared at the sidelight window. She was wearing a red velvet holiday sweater and holding a glass of my expensive Pinot Noir. I smiled, though I was exhausted. "Hey, Brenda, my key isn't working. Can you let me in?" She didn't reach for the deadbolt. Instead, her lips curled into a cold, triumphant smirk. She pressed her face closer to the glass. "We changed the locks," she said, a voice muffled but perfectly clear through the pain. "What? Why?" I asked, a sense of dread pooling in my stomach. "Let me in, it's freezing out here." "No," Brenda replied plainly. "Jessica and the kids are here, and frankly, Chloe, your energy is just too toxic. You work too much, you're always stressed, and you bring everyone down. This is Liam's house, and we've decided we want a family-only Christmas tonight. You can go sleep in your car or find a hotel." I stared at her, my brain struggling to process the sheer audacity of what she was saying. "Brenda, open this door right now." Through the window, I saw Liam walk into the hallway. My heart leaped. Thank God, I thought. He'll put a stop to this. Liam looked at me through the glass. Our eyes met. He saw me shivering in the biting 20-degree wind. I saw him swallow hard. He looked at his mother, then looked back at me, gave a helpless little shrug, and literally turned his back and walked into the living room. He walked away. Brenda gave me one final, sickeningly sweet wave. "Merry Christmas, Chloe," she mouthed. Then she pulled the blinds shut. The porch light clicked off, plunging me into the freezing dark night. For a solid 2 minutes, I stood frozen on the porch, not from the plunging temperature, but from the absolute shock. My breath plumed in white clouds before me. I pounded my fists against the heavy oak door, screaming Liam's name, my knuckles stinging with the impact. Silence. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I yanked it out, my fingers stiff and clumsy from the cold. It was a text from Liam. "Liam, please don't make a scene. Mom is really stressed out with Jess being here, and you guys have been bumping heads. Just go to a hotel for the night. I'll pay for it. We'll talk tomorrow when things cool down. Love you." I read the text 3 times. "I'll pay for it. With what money?" He hadn't had a steady freelance gig in 3 months. I was paying for the groceries they were currently eating. I was paying the heating bill, keeping them warm. I didn't reply. A dangerous, icy calm suddenly washed over me, completely erasing my exhaustion. The tears that had threatened to fall a moment ago evaporated. I wasn't sad anymore. I was furiously, dangerously awake. I walked back to my car, started the engine, and cranked the heat. I drove to a cheap Motel 6 just off Interstate 88, the only place with a vacancy on Christmas Eve. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap industrial cleaner. The bedspread was a questionable shade of brown. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, still in my hospital scrubs, and stared at the peeling wallpaper. They thought they had won. Brenda thought she had successfully ousted the nagging wife from her son's property. Liam thought he could sweep his cowardice under the rug with a text message. But they had made one catastrophic miscalculation. I opened my laptop. For the past 3 weeks, I had noticed strange pieces of mail arriving at the house addressed to Liam and Richard from a secondary mortgage lender. Because the house was solely in my name, my financial radar was highly sensitive. A few days ago, while everyone was out grocery shopping, I had taken a peek at the documents left carelessly on Richard's desk in the guest suite. Richard and Brenda, convinced that Liam was the legal owner of the $1 million property, had convinced their spineless son to apply for a home equity line of credit. Hell up. They wanted to pull $150,000 out of his house to fund a new business venture, for Richard a supposedly foolproof franchise opportunity. But here's the kicker. Liam couldn't get the HELOC loan because his income was basically zero. So to push the application through, Liam had forged my signature as a co-signer, assuming he could intercept the paperwork before I ever saw it. What the three of them didn't realize was that a forged signature wouldn't matter anyway. The house wasn't just in my name. After a scare with a malpractice lawsuit scare at the hospital a year prior, I had transferred the deed of the house into an LLC for asset protection. I was the sole managing member of that LLC. Liam's name was completely legally detached from the property. The bank had flagged the HELOC application not just because of suspicious signatures, but because Liam Mitchell had zero legal claim to the collateral he was trying to borrow against. It was mortgage fraud, federal felony-level mortgage fraud. I looked at the clock. It was 11:45 p.m. on Christmas Eve. I scrolled through my contacts and found the name Daniel Harrington. Daniel and I went to college together before he went to law school. He was now a high-powered real estate and divorce attorney in downtown Chicago. He was also a ruthless bulldog of a lawyer who happened to be Jewish, meaning he was likely awake and unbothered by holiday interruptions. I hit call. He picked up on the third ring. "Chloe," Daniel's deep voice crackled through the speaker. "Are you all right? It's almost midnight." "Daniel," I said, my voice eerily steady, "I need your help. My husband and his family just locked me out of my house." "They what?" I could hear a chair scrape as he stood up. "Are you safe? Do we need to call the police to get you back in?" "I'm safe. I'm at a motel," I replied. "But I want to go back in tonight. I want to let them sleep comfortably. Because tomorrow, I want to drop a nuclear bomb on their lives." For the next hour, I explained everything. The lie about the house's ownership, the squatting in-laws, the changed locks, and most importantly, the forged HELOC documents I had taken photos of earlier that week. Daniel was quiet for a long moment when I finished. When he finally spoke, his tone was lethal. "Chloe, changing the locks on the sole legal owner of a property without a court order is an illegal self-help eviction. We can have the police drag them out in handcuffs tomorrow if you want. But the forged HELOC application, that's bank fraud. Your husband just handed you the keys to completely obliterate him in a divorce." "I don't just want a divorce, Daniel," I said, staring at the flashing neon light outside my motel window. "I want Brenda to understand exactly whose house she tried to steal. I want them out. No 30-day notice. No familial courtesy." "Consider it done," Daniel said. "Send me the photos of the documents. I'm drafting the emergency motions right now. Drink some water, get some sleep. Tomorrow we go to war." I hung up the phone. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, watching the sun rise on Christmas Day. My phone had 13 missed calls and a barrage of texts from Liam, all feigning concern, asking where I was, telling me to come back for Christmas breakfast and apologize to his mother. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. I texted him back just one sentence. "I hope you enjoyed the breakfast, Liam, because it's the last meal you'll ever eat in my house." I woke up at 6 a.m. on Christmas Day to the harsh glare of the motel room's fluorescent bathroom light. I hadn't slept a wink. My phone screen showed 24 missed calls from Liam and a string of texts that ranged from apologetic bargaining to outright anger. His final message, sent at 3:14 a.m., read, "You're really going to ruin Christmas over a stupid argument? Come home. Mom made a breakfast casserole." I scoffed, tossing the phone onto the cheap laminate nightstand. I changed out of my wrinkled hospital scrubs, throwing on a pair of jeans and a heavy wool sweater I kept in the trunk of my car for emergencies. At 8 a.m. sharp, I pulled into the empty, snow-dusted parking lot of Daniel Harrington's downtown law firm. Daniel was already there, unlocking the glass lobby doors. He looked sharp, wide awake, and utterly ruthless in a tailored navy suit. He handed me a steaming cup of black coffee from a corner cafe. "Merry Christmas," he said, his voice echoing in the hollow marble lobby. "Let's go ruin some lives." We sat in his corner office overlooking the frozen expanse of Lake Michigan. Spread across his mahogany desk were copies of my LLC operating agreement, the property deed, and the high-resolution photos of the forged home equity line of credit application I had sent him the night before. "Is the reality of the situation," Daniel explained, tapping a silver pen against the documents. "The state of Illinois, an illegal lockout, also known as a self-help eviction, is a serious offense. Even if Liam was the owner, you are his legal spouse and a resident. Changing the locks without a formal 30-day eviction notice and a court order is a crime. But that's just the appetizer." He slid the photos of the forged HELOC application toward me. "This is the main course. Forging a signature on a financial document to extract $150,000 from a bank is federal mortgage fraud. It's a felony. Because your husband actually submitted this to the secondary lender. I checked the application portal this morning. Using the reference number in your photo, the crime has been fully committed. We aren't just walking in there with a grievance. We are walking in there with a loaded legal shotgun." The streets were quiet, picture-perfect and blanketed in fresh, undisturbed snow. Behind us, a marked Oak Brook Police Department SUV followed closely. Daniel had called in a favor with a contact at the precinct, Sergeant Hayes, explaining that a domestic dispute involving an illegal lockout and felony fraud was currently unfolding at my address. We parked at the end of the driveway. I looked at my house. Smoke was lazily drifting from the stone chimney. Inside, I knew they were likely opening presents, entirely oblivious to the hellfire marching up their front steps. Sergeant Hayes and his partner, Officer Miller, stepped out of their cruiser. "You're the homeowner?" Hayes asked, checking his notepad. "A sole legal owner," Daniel interjected, handing the sergeant a certified copy of the deed and the LLC paperwork. "In-laws changed the locks last night while she was at work. We need to gain entry, and we need to address the fraudulent documents currently sitting on the desk in the first-floor guest suite." Sergeant Hayes nodded grimly. "Let's knock." We walked up the front steps. The new brass lock gleamed in the morning sun. Sergeant Hayes bypassed the doorbell and pounded heavily on the heavy oak door with his fist. Bang, bang, bang. "Oak Brook Police." "Open the door." A full minute passed. Inside, I heard the muffled sound of a dog barking Jessica's chaotic golden retriever, followed by hushed, panicked voices. The sidelight window curtain twitched. I saw Brenda's face peek through. When she saw the police uniforms, all the color drained from her face. The deadbolt clicked. The door swung open. Liam stood there in his silk Christmas pajamas, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. Behind him, the living room was a scene of holiday excess. Wrapping paper was strewn across the hardwood floors. Jessica's kids were freezing mid-play with their new toys. Mr. Mitchell was standing near the fireplace, a half-empty mug of coffee frozen halfway to his mouth. And there was Brenda, clutching the collar of her robe, her eyes darting frantically between me, Daniel, and the police officers. "Officers," Liam stammered, his voice cracking. "Is there a problem?" "We're just having a private family Christmas." "Step aside, Mr. Mitchell," Hack Sergeant Hayes said, his tone leaving no room for debate. The officers moved into the foyer, and Daniel and I stepped in right behind them. The warmth of the house hit me, along with the smell of cinnamon and pine. It was my home, smelling exactly the way I had designed it to, being enjoyed by the people who had left me to freeze. "What is she doing here?" Mr. Mitchell suddenly boomed, recovering his bravado. He pointed a thick finger at me. "This is my son's house." We told her she wasn't welcome here for the holidays. You need to escort her off the premises." Daniel stepped forward, a shark smelling blood in the water. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Actually," Daniel said smoothly, pulling a crisp folder from his briefcase, "this is not your son's house. Liam Mitchell does not own this property. He is not on the deed. He is not on the mortgage. This home is owned entirely by an independent LLC, of which my client is the sole managing member. Liam is legally nothing more than a guest, and as of this morning, his invitation to reside here has been permanently revoked." The silence that fell over the living room was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick Persian rug. Brenda turned slowly to look at Liam. "Liam? What is he talking about? You said you bought this house before you got married." Liam looked like he was going to vomit. His face was a sickly shade of grey. He backed away slightly, putting his hands up. "Mom, I can explain." It gets better," Daniel continued, turning his attention directly to Mr. Rectley. "Mitchell, not only did you illegally change the locks on the sole legal owner of this property, which constitutes an illegal eviction and trespassing, but we are also aware of the home equity line of credit application you and Liam submitted 3 days ago." Mitchell's jaw dropped. The coffee mug in his hand tilted, spilling hot liquid onto the floor, but he didn't seem to notice. "You attempted to borrow $150,000 against a property neither of you have any legal claim to, using forged signatures," Daniel stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. He turned to the police. "Sergeant Hayes, my client has photographic evidence of the forged documents, which are currently located in the guest suite down that hall." Sergeant Hayes rested his hand on his utility belt and looked hard at Liam. "Is that true, son? Because if we go back there and find forged financial documents, you're leaving this house in handcuffs right now. Bank fraud is a federal offense." Total catastrophic panic set in. Brenda let out a high-pitched wail and collapsed onto the sofa. Jessica, who had been standing silently near the kitchen island, suddenly snapped out of her shock. She marched over to Liam, grabbed him by the shoulder, and spun him around. "Are you out of your mind?" Jessica screamed at her brother. "Forged documents? You lied about owning the house? I brought my children here. You made me an accessory to an illegal lockout." Jess, please, it was Dad's idea." Liam pleaded, throwing his own father under the bus without a second of hesitation. He needed the money for the franchise. He told me to just sign her name. He said she'd never find out." "You spineless coward." "Mr. Mest," Mitchell roared, stepping toward Liam. "You're a grown man. You signed the papers." Enough," Sergeant Hayes barked, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Everyone froze. The officer turned to me and Daniel. "What do you want to do here?" "I can arrest the husband right now for the forgery, and we can start the process of formally evicting the parents." I looked at the people who had treated me like garbage in my own home. I looked at Liam, the man who had promised to protect me, now cowering behind his mother's sofa, shivering in his silk pajamas. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No anger, no sadness, just a profound, clinical detachment. "I want them gone," I said quietly, but firmly. "All of them. Today." Daniel nodded and turned to the family. "Here is the deal you are going to take. My client is not going to press charges for the felony fraud or the illegal lockout today. In exchange, every single one of you is going to pack your bags and vacate this property by 5 p.m. If you are not gone by 5001 p.m., Sergeant Hayes will execute the arrest warrant for Liam, and we will file a civil suit against Richard and Brenda for the damages related to the lockout. You will leave and you will never set foot on this property again, Asik. Jessica didn't hesitate. I'm packing, she said, her voice shaking with fury. She looked at her parents. You guys are entirely on your own. I am not getting dragged into a federal fraud investigation because you two are greedy. She rounded up her bewildered kids and dragged them upstairs. Brenda burst into dramatic, heaving sobs. Where are we supposed to go? She cried, looking at me with absolute hatred. It's Christmas Day. Everything is closed. We don't have any money. I suggest you look into the Motel 6 off Interstate 88. I replied, staring her dead in the eyes. The room smells like industrial bleach, but they have vacancies. I should know. I stayed there last night. The next 7 hours were a masterclass in humiliation. Daniel and I sat at the kitchen island drinking coffee and watching as the Mitchell family frantically dismantled their lives. Officer Miller remained stationed by the front door to ensure there was no property damage. They dragged heavy suitcases down the stairs, their faces flushed with shame and anger. Liam tried to approach me twice, begging for a private conversation, begging for a chance to explain. I didn't even look at him. Daniel simply held up a hand and said, "All communication goes through my office from now on, Liam. Keep walking." At 3:30 p.m., Jessica loaded her minivan, refused to say goodbye to her parents, and drove off toward the airport. At 4:45 p.m., Mr. Mitchell and Brenda dragged their final trash bags full of clothes out the front door. Liam followed them, carrying a cardboard box full of his design books. He paused at the threshold, looking back at me one last time. He looked pathetic. A fraud who had finally been exposed to the harsh light of reality. He opened his mouth to speak, but Sergeant Hayes stepped forward. "Keep moving, Mr. Mitchell." Liam closed his mouth, stepped out into the freezing wind, and the heavy oak door clicked shut behind him. The house was suddenly, beautifully silent. By the time New Year's Eve rolled around 6 days later, my life looked entirely different. I had hired a professional cleaning crew to scrub the house from top to bottom, erasing every physical trace of Brenda's terrible thrift store art and Liam's lingering cologne. I had a top-tier security firm install an entirely new smart lock system, complete with exterior cameras and a reinforced steel core on the front door. Daniel had officially filed the divorce papers, serving Liam at the cheap extended stay motel his parents had been forced to rent. The fraud evidence gave me absolute leverage. Liam signed the uncontested divorce papers without demanding a single dime of alimony, terrified that I would hand the HELOC documents over to the district attorney. As the clock struck midnight on New Year's Eve, the fireworks began to pop over the Chicago skyline in the distance. I sat alone in my massive, quiet living room, wrapped in a warm blanket, a glass of expensive Pinot Noir in my hand. I looked around at the space I had worked so hard to build. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was a fortress. And the only people holding the keys were the ones who had earned them. What would you have done if your in-laws locked you out of your own home on Christmas Eve? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate karma and taking back control, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more crazy, real-life drama stories every single week. See you next time.